go ahead and get started, and it'll
Yeah, we just got the
catch
notice.
up. We're good to go.
All right, Shannon, take it away.
All right, welcome everybody to Living Well Wednesday. My name's Shannon Webb, and I work on employment projects with the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, as well as the Living Well project. And since it's October and Disability Employment Awareness Month, we want to continue the theme of talking about employment and this month and what people are doing around the state with employment. Today we have two guest speakers. We have Alicia Reinhardt. She's the Transition and Graduation Education Consultant from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. And then we also have Sarah Lincoln, the program and policy analyst working in the area of transition for the Wisconsin Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. And for the next 40 minutes, we'll spend time hearing from them what's going on with the Department of Public Instruction, with schools, DPI, and with Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, DVR. So in terms of youth and employment services and transition from high school to adult life and employment. So I will hand it over to Alicia. And if you have questions, feel free to put those in the chat. Between the speakers too, we can also take time to, take additional questions. And we'll be looking in the Facebook Live comments as well for questions. So please feel free to post any questions or comments there. So Alicia, you want to give us a overview of what DPI is doing right now?
Absolutely. Thanks, Shannon. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I just have a few slides that I'll share with everyone today, but happy to answer any questions that come up as well. So thanks again for inviting me. We are always happy to talk about what schools are doing, because DPI staff and the special education team specifically have been working really hard to help schools and families and students kind of navigate this really odd school year. And that seems to be, it's going to be a little bit of a roller coaster, is how I described it at one point yesterday. So given that it is Disability Employment Awareness Month, I thought I would spend a few minutes to start today and talk about the 2020 Indicator 14 survey. So that is a survey that DPI conducts of students 1 year after they leave high school. And we ask students what they are doing after high school. Are they enrolled in education? Are they doing any sort of training? Or are they working? And that survey is conducted each summer from June through September. So we just finished the 2020 survey, and I'm able to present some preliminary results to you all this morning. We had about 24 surveys still open when I created this slide, and those surveys have since closed. So there's going to be maybe very small changes to these numbers, but given that a majority were done, we wanted to share that with you. So like I said, this survey looks at education and employment of students 1 year after they leave high school. So the 2020 survey had about a 68% response rate. That was up from last year. Last year's response rate was 66%. So that's improvement. We're happy to see that we were able to reach more former students this summer. You can see here, I've color coded these arrows on the bottom, kind of showing the green arrows are the directions that we want the numbers to move, and the red arrows are those categories that are moving in the direction that we're not really looking for, not so favorable. So thinking about our former students that were surveyed this past summer, 25% of those students were enrolled in higher education. This is down a little bit, about 2% down, but that's not super surprising to us given what sort of went on last spring. The good news that I think I really wanted to share today was that competitive employment was actually up. So even in this job market that's been pretty affected by COVID, where we're still seeing more students competitively employed 1 year after leaving high school. That is up about 2% from last year. These last three categories are things that were less interested in, but there's still outcomes for students, so we'd like to report them. So other post-secondary training meaning that a student was enrolled in some sort of education or training, but they didn't necessarily complete a whole term or a whole semester of that education. We did see this category go up just a tiny bit, like hundredths of a percentage point, but it does correlate to less students being enrolled in higher education for a term. This first category we looked at. Another good move was the other employment, meaning somebody had a job, but they weren't competitively employed. That did go down. So that was a good move, as well as the students not meeting criteria. So they probably fell in one of these two other categories, meaning that they were doing something after high school, but probably not as desirable of an outcome as we would want for those individuals. That number also moved down a little bit. So overall, we didn't see a major shift in the survey numbers. I'll be really interested to see what the 2021 survey looks like, and our students that graduated last spring and what this year will kind of bring for them. But I was happy to see that the first portion of COVID-19 really didn't have a huge impact on what our students were doing. And then very happy to hear that employment is continuing to move up. That is definitely something we want to celebrate. So then when Shannon and Sally asked me to come talk today, they really wanted me to spend a couple minutes focusing on what are schools doing right now to support employment, given that schools are kind of functioning in all different states of learning. There are schools who are doing virtual learning 100% of the time. There are schools that are doing face-to-face learning, and then there's a lot of different situations in between, right? And so in terms of transition and supporting employment, all of those processes and requirements of schools are still in place. So a school still needs to provide the same level of special education that they did before COVID-19 was here. They still need to go through the same transition processes and procedures and planning and transitioning to life after high school or to working with agencies after high school. All of those requirements are still in place. What might look a little bit different is how some of those things happen. And so this is where school teams and IEP teams need to do some thinking and maybe be a little bit creative. So there might be some transition services that need to change, either because the student or family may choose that right now it's not safe to work on this transition service. Like for our family, it's not safe to be looking for employment right now. But there are a lot of other transition skills that you could be working on in maybe a virtual format that would be safer. However, if that goal doesn't need to change for whatever reason, or there's no interest in changing it, a school can still be supporting a student to find a job right now. I'm sure you'll hear Sarah in a minute talk about how DVR is supporting those services as well. IEP teams need to be thinking about the safety of the student and the instructor when they're working on these transition skills and services, and that the student continues to make progress to those post-secondary goals. That's a really key point, and that COVID is a big thing right now. It's kind of getting in our way, but we have to make sure that even if it's in the way, it's still allowing students to make progress towards their post-secondary goals in education and training or employment. In addition, IEP teams might want to consider, or they shouldn't, might. IEP teams should consider additional services that might be needed because the amount of time that school was closed last spring. We know that virtual learning does not work for every student. And virtual learning is sometimes really tough when we're talking about transition skills and building skills specifically on the job. And so there may be a need to think about extra services this school year that couldn't happen last spring because school was closed across Wisconsin. So to support all those things that I just talked about, how do we make that happen in a virtual world? Like I said, it's a little bit different. It might be a bit more creative. It might take a bit longer. Communication might look a bit different, but there's a lot of good resources out there to support employment. The first link here is the Wisconsin Transition app from TIG, or the Transition Improvement Grant. That app can be accessed on any computer or tablet, mobile device, and that will help a student and or a family walk through a post-secondary transition plan. Next, the next link is a Padlet, which is a website that was put together by the Transition Improvement Grant. And this includes a variety of resources to support learning during COVID, whether it be virtual or in person and socially distanced. There's a wealth of resources on this page, and they specifically focus on that education and training, employment, and independent living goals that we set in the PTP, or the post-secondary transition plan. And in addition, there's some other supporting resources there for teachers and families, supporting just recreation and staying healthy, as well as, you know, supporting social emotional health right now. And then the last link on here is an additional services guide for families. A few minutes ago, I mentioned that IEP teams might be thinking about adding extra services based on the learning that happened for students last spring while school was closed. And this guide will really help families and students and advocates think about how they prepare for that conversation with their IEP team. What questions should they be asking? And how do they enter that discussion so that they can come to a good setup so the student can continue to make progress towards those post-secondary goals. And with that, that is all that I planned to share this morning, but I'm happy if any questions have come up in the chat, or if anyone wants to unmute, I'd love to answer any questions that folks have.
Yeah, or if if anyone wants to comment on some, innovative things you're seeing, happen in your districts, or, with your services that you're providing.
Absolutely.
And then just wanted to verbally point out too, Sally mentioned in the chat that we will be sharing the links and post the PowerPoints, on the Facebook pages and whatnot after the presentation. So.
I just had a question. So we've heard even from some of our adult service providers that they've been collaborating with school districts, and so maybe just what is your advice to parents who have maybe thought about some different ideas and how they might approach their school district with those ideas?
Oh, I love that question. Yeah, I don't know that there's anything special to that. I think an IEP team, needs to include family and student input. And so if you have ideas, share them. I think right now, the communication between IEP teams and families is critical, because every day looks a little bit different in school. Tomorrow, school could be closed because there's been a COVID exposure and students need to stay home for safety. And I've heard from a lot of teachers and families that switching back and forth has been a little bit difficult. And so I would not hesitate to reach out at any time to your teacher, to your principal, your special education director, if you have an idea about maybe, a creative way a service can happen, or if a service isn't working, speak up and let your team know.
What about families of students who are in that last year? I think that's another worry for families, as they missed services at the end of last year, and now things are just any guidance on that DPI has done, or any thoughts on that?
Sure, absolutely. So that is definitely where that additional services conversation comes in. And so additional services are even available right now to students who may be transitioned in the 1920 school year, so last spring. We know that because school was closed across the state, there was a gap created, especially for our students who were transitioning from high school to employment outcomes and employment settings. Those transitions take a lot of hands-on work and learning and support. And So that is an option that families and students can ask about. Even if they've graduated and that transition it didn't go well or isn't going well, it's still an option for schools to help support that transition. And again, that additional services conversation needs to be happening within the first 6 months of school. That's being required by DPI for all students with IEPs. However, I think for a student in their last year of school, that's probably even more of a priority. Schools have been directed to prioritize these conversations for students who really struggled with virtual learning last spring, or who maybe didn't get many of their services because it was difficult to implement them through a computer screen. Those students and conversations need to be happening first. And so if you feel like your family fits into one of those situations, please bring it up with your school.
I'm wondering if it makes sense to just, if you could, maybe click on that additional services guide.
Absolutely.
I think sometimes it's helpful for people to see resources just to kind of
Mm-hmm.
know what ideas might be in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this was created by one of our other grant projects, WI-SPI, the Wisconsin Statewide Parent Educator Initiative. And it really helps a family think through, what do I need to bring to help the IEP team determine whether or not my student needs additional services. And when I say bring, you don't necessarily like need to bring a worksheet. What do you need to share with the IEP team? And so it has great questions and things to consider, like, how well was your child able to access learning? Was how the instruction delivered, was that effective? What are you observing about your child? What was their input on how the virtual learning situation went down? Write down the things that were barriers, the things that didn't happen. Organize samples if you have them. I'm just going to keep going. Think of maybe past concerns that have come up for your child in terms of like if there was a break in the school calendar and that caused some concerns for your child, what would that mean now? Because we may experience breaks again this school year if you haven't already. And so it would be important for IEP teams to plan with that. Let your IEP team know what's the best way to communicate with me and my student. Parents are trying to work from home right now too. Students may be still working out in the community or even at home themselves. And so making sure that school is aware of what's the best way to get a hold of you. A phone call during your workday might not be very possible, but you could certainly, maybe check an email here or there, maybe a text message later. And then, what are the celebrations? What are the things that were learned during this time at home? There was lots of opportunity to learn different things during this time, and how those might impact transition and employment.
Great, thank you. I see Caitlin posted the links that were in the PowerPoint in the chat here for those of you, if you'd like to pull those open during the presentation. So, all right, well, thank you. And, if anything else, if any questions come to mind for Alicia, after, after this, when Sarah's talking, then certainly just keep posting them in the chat or in the Facebook comments. So we'll move. Thanks, Alicia, and we'll move over to Sarah Lincoln from the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint? Good to go? Okay, great. So again, my name is Sarah Lincoln. I am a program and policy analyst with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. DVR hopefully is an acronym that you are all familiar with. So I'm going to go through some of the basics of DVR, and as I move through the slides, I will address kind of some of the ways that COVID and everything that is happening with our services has changed due to COVID. Overall, the basics that I'm going to share with you are still very much in place. So I'm going to talk about application and referral, eligibility criteria, our DVR transition services, and what your individualized plan for employment may look like, what it means to have your case closed, and then I also share some transition resources at the end. So DVR's mission is to assist individuals with disabilities in obtaining, maintaining, or improving their employment. So we like to use just this nice saying, find a job, keep a job, and get a better job. I also have included down here our DVR transition video link. I'm not going to share that today because that will take up some time, but please feel free to go ahead and click on that link. Maybe it'll get shared in the chat now. Otherwise, it is out on YouTube. If you simply search DVR transition, it should come up. So what is DVR? We provide individualized services to anyone with a disability who is interested in work. And when we say interested in work, we are talking about competitive integrated employment. So DVR does not support sheltered work or work that is provided at some minimum wage or enclave work. We are really interested in helping individuals get the right services so they can work in the community, making a competitive wage and working towards being as independent as possible. Some of the services that you may receive, but again, there are many, many more, are vocational counseling, skills development. You may experience and participate in temporary work experiences. We also have the opportunity to have individuals with the most significant disabilities participate in supported employment. And we also provide education and training that may be necessary to achieve your career goals. So application and referral. So high school students should apply for DVR 2 years prior to exiting high school. So if you're graduating around age 18, you should apply when you're a sophomore or around 16 years old. And if you're staying through the age of 21, we would encourage you to apply for DVR around the age of 19. And again, for any applicants that are under the age of 18 or over the age of 18 with a guardian, your individual's guardian must sign all of our documents because they are considered documents that your guardian is required to sign. So we do have our referral form link that I've included in this slide as well. And currently, and it's been this way for a very long time, we have our referral form that's available online. You can submit it electronically. And then when you are contacted by the local DVR office and you are asked to come in for an orientation, you will then take that referral form and it turns into an application. And as soon as you sign it, that then becomes your formal application and entry into DVR. Now, through COVID, we have found that we are not able to have people come into our offices because they're closed to sign applications. So we do have the ability now to have you provide those signatures either through an electronic way, or you can send an email indicating that you are in fact giving permission to have your name signed on the application form. So with that, I will stop for a moment and just say all of our DVR offices are currently closed to the public, but that doesn't mean that on an individualized basis, you can make an appointment with your counselor. You can choose to meet face-to-face as long as all of the correct PPE is being used and you're in a safe place. And so that could be in the community somewhere, it could be outside right now. But again, those are arranged on an individualized basis right now. None of our offices are open to the public. So what makes you eligible for DVR? You must have a documented medical or psychological disability that prevents a barrier to employment. And so I mentioned that once you submit your referral form that you are contacted by the local DVR office to perhaps collect some medical documentation for you to schedule your orientation. That also can be done by the Stout Vocational Rehabilitation Institute. They are a contracted entity through DVR that helps us with our eligibility service. So you may hear from someone from SVRI, or oftentimes in the event that we are serving students and we have counselors that are directly connected to our students, oftentimes SVRI doesn't get involved and our local counselors just go ahead and process the referral and eligibility. And so if SVRI is involved, they make a recommendation to indicate that someone is eligible. But DVR does hold that final eligibility determination decision. And then again, after you're determined eligible, an orientation and an initial meeting takes place. And again, as I mentioned, those can be on a case-by-case basis now in person, or we can also do them through a variety of different kinds of virtual meetings. We have a platform called Blue Jeans in our office. We can also do other kinds of things. We can do a FaceTime meeting, things like that. So we're making a lot of different virtual meeting platforms work. So order of selection. Order of selection is in place if there is a time where DVR has to close one of our categories in order to serve those with the most significant disabilities first. So we have 3 different orders of selection, and we are required by law to serve the most significant disability first. So the areas that we look at are mobility, communication, self-care, self-direction, interpersonal skills and acceptance, work tolerance, and work skills. So basically, when we're talking about an order of selection, we're talking about a wait list. For DVR right now, we have open and immediate services for categories 1 and 2, and category 3 currently is a closed category. That means that you have a disability, but it does not seriously limit your ability to work in one or more of the functional areas that were on the previous slide. So just, yeah, like I mentioned, category 1 and 2 are currently open. If you wanted further information about our categories, I did provide that link. So once you go through, you submit your referral, you go through eligibility, you are found eligible, you are in category 1 or 2, you then come in and you meet with your counselor and you start developing your individualized plan for employment. So unfortunately, the acronym is very similar to the individualized education plan, which is your school plan if you are a student with a disability. So IPE is DVR and IEP is school. The great thing about these 2 acronyms that they are similar, something to mention is that they should very much be complementary of each other for transition age students. So if you are receiving services from your school through your IEP plan, and then you get enrolled in DVR, your IPE plan should be very much complementary of those services. So we can provide the same services as the school is doing, but that should only happen if the student needs those kinds of services. So it could be that while you're in school, your school is helping you with a temporary work experience, but then on the weekend you want to continue working at that place of employment and getting your temporary work experience, then DVR can pick up and help support you on the weekends when you wouldn't be getting school services. So again, those plans should be very complementary of each other, and schools and DVR are required to work together in order to provide transition services, which we call pre-employment transition services, which I'll get to on the next slide. So for students, we do not require that you have a really specific job goal. It can be a little bit more broad. So if you were interested in going into the trades, for example, you don't necessarily have to say that I want to be a plumber. You could say, I want to work in the trades and I am interested in exploring the fields of maybe plumbing and becoming an electrician, for example. As you move through your plan and you move through transition, your plan will be amended to have a much more specific goal. But as a student, we know you're just kind of in those exploratory phases, so you're not required to have a specific goal when you're a student. So the definition of a student is anyone that is ages 14 to 21. They have a disability and they're in high school or an educational training program. So that could mean that you are you're participating in a technical school, or you're going to college, you're at a full-blown university, or you could be in the high school's 18 to 21-year-old program. So that's the definition of a student for DVR. And again, I mentioned that we are required to provide pre-employment transition services to students, and I mentioned the definition of a student, in collaboration with our local school districts. So there are 5 categories of services that fall under the categories of services, and those are job exploration counseling, work-based learning experiences, counseling on opportunities for transition to post-secondary or higher education programs, work readiness training, and instruction in self-advocacy. And so DVR is required to set aside 15% of our annual federal allotment to provide these services. So we do have a very specific requirement to serve students while they are ages 14 to 21 in high school or post-secondary. Again, this is just, it cites the law. So the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act is where we have the requirement. And again, I mentioned that we're required to work with schools. And so that is a requirement. And we do have a counselor that is assigned to every one of our public high schools in the state. So just to let you guys know that if you want to find that list, we do have that information available. So DVR does provide supported and customized employment. So we contract for job development services for in-depth job development in the community for those that have the need for supported and customized employment. It is based on the student's interests and abilities. The job supports are provided by a job coach or could be by natural supports based on the individualized needs. The job must pay at least minimum wage and meet the going rate for that job. So we want to make sure that if we have an individual that is participating in supported and customized employment, that they are getting the same wage that someone without a disability may be getting. And that is true for anyone that we serve in DVR. So we want to make sure that those people, that anyone that we serve is getting a competitive wage. And for supported and customized employment, self-employment may be the best option, and DVR does offer services in that area as well. So once you have worked with DVR, you have you've received your set of services, and again, it looks individualized for every single person that we serve. DVR is meant to be a short-term program. So once we find your job that fits your strengths and your capabilities, and you are happy in that job and you're stable in that job, DVR is required to stay with you for about 90 days to make sure that you are stable in that employment before we will talk to a consumer about closing your case. Now, for students, we are often involved in students for much, much longer than 90 days. Sometimes it can be a couple of years. It really just is individualized, but we are required to follow you once you are successfully employed for at least 90 days. And then we will go ahead and hopefully close your case as a successful case. We are required to get wage documentation from you when your case is closed. So that may be a pay stub that you get. It may be that you received a letter when you were hired at your job that shows your wage per hour. But that is a WIOA or a Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act requirement that we collect that documentation. So our counselor and service providers will work with you in order to gather that. So for an individual that is in supported or customized employment, we make sure that our 90-day time frame to follow you doesn't begin until you are transitioned to long-term support, or perhaps you are receiving long-term support through someone in your family. It doesn't have to be the technical family care or IRIS programs. It could be that you are paying for your natural supports outside of those programs. But we really want to make sure that you're stable in the job, that we are working in collaboration with any individual that is supporting you during that time. So for our customized and supported employment people, we are with you even a little bit longer, just to make sure you're stable. If something comes up, we can provide a service to make sure that things are going well. And then once your case is closed, any consumer has the ability to reapply for DVR services at any time. So let's say you got your first job with DVR and you were working as an office assistant, and then you decide that you are interested in doing something completely different. Let's say if you decided you want to go into the trades after you've done some of this work and decided, I can't sit at a desk for a long period of time. It's just not a good fit for me. You can come back to DVR and reapply, and we can help you get those skills that you need in order to have a job in a different field. So there are not a finite amount of times that you can apply for VR. You can come back at any time. So we are a statewide program. We are broken out into 11 different workforce development areas. And so they are shown here on this map. There is also a link to our office locations included here that goes to our website with the phone number and email for you to contact the local offices if you need to do that. And then again, we partner with lots of different partners in order to provide our services. So you will most likely receive vocational guidance and counseling from your counselor. You may receive information and referral services from our counselors. You may do a little bit of job exploration with our counselors, but oftentimes too, you may receive services from a contracted service provider network. And so you may end up having a service on your plan where you are having an outside entity work with you to provide those services. So during COVID right now, some of those services may look a little different than they have looked in the past. Again, these are all individualized. So some individuals may be going through a temporary work experience and have a job developer right there in the, or a job coach right there at your job with you, just like they have been. It might look a little different because you're both wearing masks. You may be social distancing, but for some, it looks just the same as it has, with just the little differences that COVID has required. But for others, it may be now that you are getting job coaching through your phone and your service provider has set up an app with you or a system with you where they check in through your phone, or they find different apps that are more helpful to you that way. And there are also some of our consumers who have chosen right now to hold off on those in the community types of services and really are working on more of that job exploration, work readiness types of services. We have developed some new virtual services. An example of one of those is called Explore Work, where you're able to do all of a lot of work readiness stuff via a training program that is web-based. So some services look a little bit different, but virtually we're trying to make things flow as normal as possible with being careful to put things in place to make everyone safe during COVID. So again, they're all individualized based on what the individual needs. We do have a statewide network of job centers. And again, we are required to work with all of our local high schools in the state. So I've included here some transition best practices. We have the transition action guide. There's a link there that helps families and schools and providers work through the transition process. Again, we have for some schools, now depending on if they're in school, they may have, our VR counselors may have regular office hours being held at the school. Again, that may look different right now. As Alicia mentioned, every school is kind of running things differently. And so based on your local school district, you may not see an actual counselor in your office, but maybe they have Zoom meetings that are set up intermittently and the students are still going to a separate place to meet with their counselor virtually. It just depends. So here, those are some best practices for you. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thanks, Sarah. And just so everyone knows, Caitlin's been busy putting all the links that Sarah's been mentioning in the chat. So if you wanted to get those, you can always copy and paste them from the chat. Sally, did you have anything that came to mind, or did you see anything on Facebook?
Yeah, no, I didn't. There's nothing on Facebook. I just have a couple questions. So,
Sure.
or even a comment. One of the things that because I worked in doing special ed work. So one of the things we often saw was that sometimes families thought that they got that referral done through the school, or even when they met with the counselor, they thought maybe that was the beginning step. So just reiterating that they still have to go on and apply, right?
Well, anyone can fill out a referral for a student. So their teacher may have done that. They may have filled out the referral form and submitted that for the student. But the student will be contacted directly from either SVRI, South Vocational Rehab Institute, or from our local offices in order for them to set up their orientation and complete the application process. But the individual themselves can get support from their teacher in order to do a referral. Their parents can do it. They can do it themselves. It's when it comes down to the actual application process, that cannot be done by the teacher. That has to be done by the student and their parent or guardian, depending on their age and their particular situation.
Great. The other thing is you talked about that 2 years before graduation. Are people able to do it sooner if they feel like they need a longer time?
Yep, that's a great question. So yeah, that is a guideline or a best practice is that 2 years prior. But if you are a student that requires or is interested in DVR services sooner, there is no limit to say that a freshman or someone age 14 can't apply. But really the schools are also required to provide services, employment services while they're in school. So we want to make sure we are continuing to partner with schools to provide those services. And we can invite a DVR counselor to an IEP meeting just to educate the family around the services that DVR can provide when the student is ready to participate in those services. So yes, it can be at a younger age. The 2 years prior is just a guideline.
So there is a question on Facebook. It said, if a student takes a job and works for 3 months successfully, will his or her case close?
So it depends. If the case will not automatically close, the case is closed in consult with the consumer and the counselor. If the job that the student has taken is really like a part-time job, a stepping stone job to what they want their permanent job to be, then we would not close the student. We would continue to provide services to get them to their end goal job. We know that lots of us worked as, in part-time jobs that we didn't want to be our careers when we were in high school. So let's say my son, for example, he works at our local pizza place and he washes dishes, but if he were participating in VR, that would not be his end job goal. So we would continue to work with him until he was able to get the job that he really wants.
Right. So they could have multiple part-time jobs in high school, which we know is important.
Very important.
As they get ready for their more permanent job later on.
Yep, exactly. And again, your case doesn't automatically close. That's a conversation that happens when everyone is ready to do that.
I think this is an interesting question too, is what if you're taking extended time off during that 3 months? And I think right now that's so interesting. I know personally for my son, his job what he was doing has been put on hold because it's not in person at the moment. And so what kind of happens to a person's case as if they have this break during that 3 months that you were supposed to be working?
Yep. So we do have the ability to put your case on pause virtually. We have a status that we can put your case on pause. Or we also may look at adding some different services to your plan right now that focuses more on things that you can do virtually or participate in work readiness kinds of activities if either your job you're participating in is currently not allowing you to be there, or it's not safe for you to be there. You don't feel like it's a safe place for you to be. We can look at providing some other services, or we can pause your case. And depending on the individualized circumstances, some families are just really overwhelmed right now with the school requirement and other things that they are choosing to have their case closed. But again, that's an individualized choice. And you can always come back and reapply when you're ready to do that. But you can have your case paused.
What other supports are there for students who are going to college from DVR?
What kinds of supports are available? So depending on your situation and depending on what your job goal is, DVR does provide what we call a training grant. So we are able to provide funds. We don't pay for the entirety of your college, but we are able to help support to pay for some courses in order for you to get the credential you need in order to get the job that you need. And when you are in school too, we do very much encourage you to use the supports at the university. Lots of all universities have disability programs where they offer services to help students. But if there is something that a student needs outside of what the school offers, that can be on your plan as well. So you can be receiving other services from DVR while you're participating in college. But again, we strongly encourage you to get a hold of your Disability Student Services office while you're participating in a post-education training program.
I just have one more question. Where do people get a list of service providers if they're looking for like the job developer, the job coach? How do they get those lists?
So your vocational counselor should be providing you with a list of the providers that are available in your area for a specific service on your plan. So then you will have the informed choice to choose a provider that may be the best fit for you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions hanging out there on Facebook, Sally?
No, not on Facebook and none in the chat.
All right.
So I think we're good to go.
Great. Well, thank you. And just a reminder, we will, put this will be on, it's obviously on Facebook Live and available on the BPDD website. We send the recording out as well and the PowerPoint and whatnot. And I just want to say thank you to Alicia and Sarah for joining us and giving us lots of really great information about how youth can continue to get transition services and employment services during this time right now. So appreciate it.
Next week, we won't be here live for Living Well Wednesday because it's the self-determination conference. So we are planning some type of watch party. We'll advertise that soon, but you can still register, I think, for the self-determination conference. So I encourage you to maybe do that. But thanks a lot. And
it's free, so.
Yes, it is free. And we'll see you at the beginning of November.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.